On the night of April 21 to 22, 2016, the peaceful rural town of Pike County, Ohio was shaken by a tragedy that would leave its residents in shock for years to come. 8 members of the Rhoden family were brutally murdered in a carefully orchestrated attack that spanned across 4 homes in the area. The discovery of their bodies would mark the beginning of what would become the largest and most complex criminal investigation in Ohio's history. The murders occurred over a period of hours, with 7 adults and one 16-year-old boy shot execution-style in 3 adjacent homes, while the 8th victim, an adult male, was found in his camper in a nearby town. 3 young children, 2 infants and a 3-year-old, were discovered unharmed in the wake of the massacre. The shocking nature of this crime and the survival of the children made the event even more haunting. At least 2 shooters were believed to be involved. The victims were shot with 3 different firearms: a 7.62 by 39 mm SKS semi-automatic rifle, a .40 caliber Glock 22 Gen 2, and a Walther Colt 1911.22 caliber pistol. The bodies of the victims were discovered in their beds, and the autopsies revealed that each victim had been shot multiple times, some up to 5 times. The sheer brutality of the crime and the fact that the victims were killed while sleeping created a chilling image of the violence that had unfolded. Investigators initially believed the attack to be an execution-style killing, and the involvement of multiple shooters was evident from the spread of the crime scenes. On the morning of April 22, Bobby Jo Manley, the sister of victim Dana Rhoden, went to check on the family's pets. What she found was beyond comprehension. She discovered 2 bodies in one of the trailers on the property and called the police. As the investigation continued, additional bodies were found, and the authorities realized that the scope of the massacre was far greater than anyone had anticipated. At 1:26 p.m. that day, a final call came in reporting the discovery of another body, bringing the total number of victims to 8. The victims included Christopher Rhoden Jr., 16, Christopher Rhoden Sr., 40, Clarence Frankie Rhoden, 20, Dana Rhoden, 37, Gary Rhoden, 38, Hannah Mae Rhoden, 19, Hannah Hazel Gilly, 20, and Kenneth Rhoden, 44. The bodies were found in a series of homes along Union Hill Road in Pike County, and all but one victim had been shot in the head. Forensic evidence revealed that a total of 32 shots were fired in the massacre, but the true nature of the crime remained elusive. At the time of the killings, there were no clear suspects, and the motive behind the murders remained a mystery. Law enforcement officials began investigating all possible angles, including the possibility that the Rhoden family was involved in criminal activities. Investigators soon uncovered marijuana cultivation and a cockfighting operation at some of the crime scenes, which raised suspicions that the killings might be connected to illegal business dealings. Despite these findings, law enforcement was careful not to jump to conclusions. They considered multiple theories, including a drug cartel connection, but no direct evidence was found to suggest that the Rhodens were targeted due to their involvement in illegal activities. As the investigation grew, authorities speculated that the killings were not random, and that the perpetrators were likely familiar with the Rhoden family, which only deepened the mystery surrounding the crime. As investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the details of the massacre, a chilling new lead began to emerge. The Wagner family, who were known to the Rhodens, became a focus of interest. In particular, Jake Wagner, the ex-boyfriend of Hannah Rhoden, who was also the father of her child, came under scrutiny. The investigation uncovered that Jake Wagner had been involved in a custody battle over his daughter with Hannah, which fueled tensions between the Wagner and Rhoden families. The discovery of the Wagner family's potential involvement marked a turning point in the investigation. Authorities believed that the Wagner family might hold the key to understanding why the Rhodens were targeted and what drove the brutal violence. But at this stage, there were still many unanswered questions. As the investigation continued to unfold, law enforcement expanded their efforts, involving multiple agencies, including the FBI and Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA), to help identify the perpetrators. By now, the investigation was growing larger by the day, and the authorities knew that finding answers would be difficult, but the case was far from over. As the investigation into the Pike County Massacre continued, the authorities began to piece together a chilling connection to the Wagner family, who had long been known to the Rhoden family. The initial discovery that the Rhodens were involved in illegal activities, particularly marijuana cultivation, hinted at possible motives, but the investigators were increasingly drawn to another, more personal connection. It was soon revealed that Jake Wagner, the ex-boyfriend of Hannah Rhoden, and the father of her child, had significant ties to the victims. Jake Wagner's custody battle over his daughter with Hannah Rhoden was one of the major catalysts behind the growing tension between the Rhodens and the Wagner family. The custody dispute had been going on for months before the murders. While the custody battle was the primary source of conflict, the Wagners' resentment of the Rhodens, fueled by a combination of family rivalry, jealousy, and financial motivations, began to take a much darker turn. Authorities started to look deeper into the Wagner family's background, and what they uncovered was unsettling. Billy Wagner, Jake's father, was no stranger to violent behavior, and his son Jake had a history of controlling and manipulative actions. The Wagners seemed to have an obsession with family loyalty, and the connection between their need for control and the brutal murders became increasingly clear. At this stage, investigators began to understand that the Wagner family had a deeply ingrained sense of entitlement and was willing to go to extreme lengths to gain what they wanted. Their involvement in the drug trade was not just a coincidence, it seemed to be central to the way the family operated. The Wagners were likely threatened by the Rhodens' control of the local marijuana business, and this could have been the motivation behind the massacre. On May 12, 2017, law enforcement agents conducted a raid on a Pike County home owned by the Wagner family. Initially, the public was told that the search was part of the investigation into the massacre, but authorities later clarified that the raid was focused on gathering evidence and not arresting suspects. Meanwhile, the authorities were also investigating Jake Wagner's residence in Adams County, which had been sold to a family member, and search warrants were executed in other locations connected to the Wagners. By June 20, 2017, the focus had shifted toward Jake Wagner and his family, who were becoming the prime suspects. Ohio authorities requested additional information on the Wagner family's whereabouts, particularly in connection to their interactions with vehicles, firearms, and ammunition. Law enforcement was also looking for any tips related to their time in Alaska. What seemed like a routine request was actually the calm before the storm, as investigators were now certain that the Wagner family was at the center of the tragedy. In November 2018, Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine made an announcement that would send shockwaves through the community. Jake Wagner and his family members were arrested and charged with the murders of 8 Rhoden family members. The arrest of Jake Wagner and his family, Billy Wagner, Angela Wagner, and George Wagner IV, confirmed that the killings were no random act of violence, but part of a carefully orchestrated plot by the Wagners to settle scores, gain custody of Jake's child, and gain control over the drug operations that were central to the Rhodens' lives. The Wagner family's arrest was a significant breakthrough in the investigation. Jake Wagner, in particular, was charged with 5 counts of murder, as investigators pieced together the details of how the murders unfolded. Jake's relationship with Hannah Rhoden, his unresolved anger, and the brutal family dynamic were all integral pieces to understanding why the Wagner family carried out such a horrific crime. The community, still reeling from the shock of the massacre, was now confronted with the reality that the killers were people they had known for years. The Wagners had appeared to be just another family in Pike County, but the reality was much darker. The investigation into the family's motives, their twisted sense of loyalty, and the possible connections to drug trafficking were now the focus of the case. The family's deep-rooted resentment and emotional instability created a perfect storm that culminated in the Rhoden family's murder. On November 13, 2018, Jake Wagner was arrested, and his arrest, along with those of his family members, was the result of years of investigation. Jake Wagner pleaded guilty to all 8 murders in 2021 in exchange for a life sentence. As part of his plea deal, he agreed to testify against his family members, providing crucial details about the crime and how the Wagner family had conspired to carry out the massacre. Jake Wagner's confession revealed that the murders were driven by a complex combination of emotions: revenge, greed, and a deep-seated need for control. The family's involvement in the drug trade and the long-standing custody battle were the immediate triggers. Jake's obsession with getting full custody of his daughter and his desire to eliminate the Rhodens as competition in the illicit trade were what ultimately pushed the Wagner family to commit these horrific murders. As the investigation unfolded, the authorities learned more about the Wagner family's premeditated actions, their use of firearms, and their efforts to cover their tracks. Their careful planning and the involvement of multiple shooters were all part of a strategy to eliminate their rivals and ensure that they gained full control of the situation. The psychological makeup of the Wagner family, particularly Jake Wagner, became a subject of intense scrutiny. Experts in criminal psychology began to analyze the family dynamics, offering insights into why a family would commit such an atrocity. The Wagners seemed to be motivated by family loyalty and financial gain, but deeper psychological issues such as control, jealousy, and manipulation were at play. The Wagners' ability to execute such a sophisticated plan without attracting attention showed their chilling ability to conceal their true nature. Angela Wagner and George Wagner IV were also arrested and charged, though Angela Wagner entered a guilty plea in 2021. She was sentenced to conspiracy charges and aggravated murder charges. The details of her role in the killings painted a picture of a mother who was fiercely loyal to her son, willing to do whatever it took to support him, even if it meant committing murder. As the investigation into the Pike County Massacre wound down, the families involved were left grappling with the aftermath of the brutal killings. With most of the perpetrators behind bars, a sense of justice had been served, but the emotional scars left on the community and the survivors were impossible to erase. The Rhoden family's tragic loss continued to reverberate through Pike County, and lingering questions about the case would remain for years to come. While Jake Wagner, the mastermind behind the massacre, pleaded guilty to the murders in 2021, bringing some closure to the case, George Wagner IV still faced the consequences of his involvement in the killings. His trial began in September 2022, after months of delays. During the trial, the prosecution presented compelling evidence that connected George Wagner IV to the brutal massacre. The most damning evidence came from Jake Wagner's testimony, where he detailed how he, along with his family, had planned the killings for months. The prosecution revealed how the family had carefully orchestrated the murders, using multiple weapons and ensuring that the victims had no chance to defend themselves. The murders were designed to be silent, efficient, and ruthless, an execution-style massacre meant to silence the Rhodens and take control over custody disputes and illegal business dealings. Despite his father and brother's guilty pleas, George Wagner IV maintained his innocence. His defense team argued that he had not played a direct role in the shooting deaths of the Rhodens. However, the jury was unconvinced, and in 2022 George Wagner IV was found guilty on all charges, including 8 counts of aggravated murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again have the chance to harm another family. The trial, though bringing some sense of justice, left many with a lingering sense of unease. The Wagner family's deep-seated dysfunction, which had led to this horrific series of events, was a reminder of the destructive nature of unresolved conflict, unchecked anger, and the corrosive effect of greed and entitlement. While the legal process worked to ensure that the perpetrators of the Pike County Massacre were brought to justice, the emotional impact of the tragedy was felt by everyone connected to the Rhoden family. The 3 children who survived the massacre, the 3-year-old, 6-month-old, and 4-day-old infant, were placed under protective services after the murders. They had witnessed their entire family wiped out in one night, and the trauma of that experience would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The loss of so many family members in such a brutal fashion left the surviving relatives and the broader community struggling to find closure. Many relatives of the Rhodens, who had lived in Pike County for generations, expressed their grief and disbelief over the murders. The small town of Peebles, where the massacre took place, was forever changed by the loss of so many beloved individuals. The Rhoden family had been known for their community involvement and close ties with their neighbors, and their absence was deeply felt by all who knew them. In the years that followed, the survivors, especially the children, were left to navigate life without their parents, siblings, and extended family. Emotional support services were provided to help them cope with the trauma, but the road to healing would be long and difficult. For the children who survived, the future was uncertain. While they were physically unharmed, the emotional scars from that night would take years to fully comprehend and address. In the wake of the massacre, the community of Pike County rallied around the surviving family members. The deaths of 8 innocent people had shattered the sense of safety and peace that had once characterized the area. However, the outpouring of support from neighbors, friends, and even strangers provided a sense of solidarity in the midst of this heartbreaking event. Fundraisers were organized to help with the funeral costs and to support the surviving children as they faced an uncertain future. Donations poured in from across Ohio as well as from other parts of the country, showing that the Pike County Massacre had touched the hearts of people far beyond the small town. Local organizations, churches, and schools also stepped in to provide support for the victims' families. The pain of losing so many loved ones was unbearable, but the community's response provided a glimmer of hope amid the tragedy. For some, the support was vital in beginning the healing process. While Jake Wagner's guilty plea and George Wagner IV's conviction brought some sense of closure, unanswered questions continued to linger. The psychological motivations behind the Wagner family's actions remained a subject of intense speculation. Many wondered how a family could descend into such violence, and what drove them to carry out such a brutal act. Some experts believe that the custody battle over Jake Wagner's daughter was the primary catalyst for the massacre, but there were other factors at play. The Wagners had deep financial and emotional investments in their illicit activities, and the Rhoden's success in the marijuana business seemed to pose a direct threat to their control over the area. It was clear that, for the Wagners, their sense of entitlement and family loyalty outweighed any regard for human life. Furthermore, questions surrounding the role of drug cartels in the murders remained unresolved. While there was evidence of illegal marijuana cultivation at the Rhoden homes, authorities were never able to definitively link the drug trade to the killings. The question of whether the Wagners had connections to larger criminal organizations or whether the murders were entirely a result of personal vendettas is one that still haunts the case. The Pike County Massacre remains one of the most tragic and chilling stories of family violence in recent history. The violence that tore through the Rhoden family's lives serves as a stark reminder of the destructive power of family conflicts, unchecked anger, and criminal greed. As the surviving members of the Rhoden family continue to heal, they must navigate the pain of losing loved ones in such a horrific and senseless manner. The justice system worked to bring those responsible for the massacre to trial, and the Wagner family members who were convicted of the murders will spend the rest of their lives in prison. But for the Rhoden family and the community that loved them, there will always be a sense of loss that can never be fully healed. This case serves as a tragic reminder of the far-reaching consequences of unresolved family feuds, the devastating effects of greed and criminal activity, and the lifelong trauma left behind by acts of violence. The Pike County Massacre will not be forgotten, and the memory of those lost will continue to haunt the small town of Peebles for years to come. If this story has left you shaken, or if you have thoughts on the motivations behind this tragedy, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Let's start a conversation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more gripping true crime stories. Join us next time as we delve into more chilling cases that will leave you questioning the dark side of human nature.